Hello everyone and welcome back to Kobean History. Today we are gonna talk about the Bronze Age in Britain, which lasted from around 2500 BC to 800 BC. But these dates can vary as there is no consensus between historians when exactly the Bronze Age started. It depends on who you ask. It could have started anywhere between 2500 BC and 2000 BC. And the Bronze Age itself can be split into the early, middle and late Bronze Ages. Before the Bronze Age, Neolithic Britain's only unique export, if you can call it that, is thought to have been tin, which was gathered in the streams of Cornwall and Devon where they could be found in the form of cassiterite pebbles which were traded in its unrefined form. Other European sources of tin can be found in Brittany and Iberia, but they are thought to have only started producing tin after the trade was already well established in Britain. Although this British tin would have been used by other cultures to create bronze, the Britons would only start to create it themselves around 2500 BC, and it would take another few hundred years for it to become widespread throughout the Isles. And this is the cause of the debate as to when the Bronze Age started. Do you consider it starting at 2500 BC when it was first created in the islands, or only a few hundred years later when it was more widespread throughout the Isles? In this video I will take the stance that the Bronze Age started around 2500 BC when it was first produced, so we will say the first stage of the Bronze Age, the early Bronze Age, stretches from 2500 BC until around 1500 BC in my timeline here. Immigration from the European mainland brought new people to Britain, and they brought their new cultures with them as well. These immigrants probably also helped in spreading the knowledge of bronze making. This integration of the immigrants is thought to have been peaceful. The newcomers adopted many aspects from the earlier Neolithic culture into their own cultures, as many of the earlier henge sites continued to be used, but the way the dead were buried did change. The communal chambered cairns and long burrows were replaced by more individual tombs, or sometimes incests, which would afterwards be covered with cairns. By 2100 BC, bronze making had become widespread. Their bronze axe heads were made by casting the metal, but the way these were fastened to the axe handles was similar to earlier stone axes. Later the socket was developed further, which made attaching the head to the handle a lot easier. Groups of unused axes are often found together, which could indicate that these axes played a role in ritual offerings. But it's more likely that these piles of bronze axes were collected by the elite, which they might have done to restrict their use among the wider population. Large amounts of bronze leaf-shaped swords were also found, as well as spears and arrowheads. The climate changed during this time as well. Whereas it had previously been warm and dry, it became much wetter as the Bronze Age went on. This forced the people to move away from their settlements in the hills, which were easy to defend, and into the fertile valleys. There they developed large livestock farms, which appear to have contributed to economic growth and the further clearing of the forests. The Wessex culture developed around 2000 BC and would last for about 600 years, not to be confused with the later Kingdom of Wessex, by the way. This Bronze Age culture developed a wide range of trade links throughout Europe. Some imports found from this time include gold from Brittany, jewelry from Germania, amber from the Baltic, as well as daggers and beads from Mycenaean Greece. The wealth generated from trade allowed the Wessex people to expand and improve the Stonehenge complex, which had started in the Neolithic. At first they continued to bury their dead in burrows, but later they switched to cremating their dead, and valuable grave goods were also often found at burial sites. Around the same time, on the Great Orme in Wales, we see the development of large-scale copper production with the opening of several mines on the peninsula. They used stone tools to mine malachite ore and refined it into copper. These mines stayed a center of copper production until around 600 BC, when they were abandoned. The Romans would later reopen it during their time in Britain, and in 1692 mining would resume once again up until the late 1800s, and these copper mines are now open for the public to visit. Proper tin mines were developed not long after in Devon and Cornwall, replacing the practice of gathering it from streams. Now we come to the Middle Bronze Age. It lasted from around 1500 BC to 1000 BC, and during this time we see the emergence of bell staves. These were a new form of axe that became common throughout North and Western Europe. It also saw Cornwall and Wales growing as a major European source for tin and copper respectively. An example of an unusual settlement from this time can be found in the fenlands of Cambridgeshire. At the Must Farm quarry, a settlement was discovered that has been dubbed Britain's Pompeii, due to it being so well preserved. The settlement was built on stilts over a river that once flowed there, and consisted of 5 houses with a palisade around it. The settlement was destroyed by fire, and the structures collapsed in the water where they were covered in silt which preserved the wood. The reason that they built their houses on water is thought to have been for protection. The palisade surrounding the buildings and the used swords found on site suggest that they had to defend themselves from other groups of people, and it's not certain if the fire was accidental or set on purpose. Another reason why they built it on water was for trade, as indicated by the wide variety of exotic items and jewelry from across Europe, as well as a large amount of Bronze Age boats found throughout the Fenlands. Around 2 kilometers north of Must Farm, at Flag Fen, a 1 kilometer long causeway was created across the wetlands, connecting the drylands to an island named Northey in the wetlands. Partway across the causeway, a small island was formed, and from the items found there, it is thought to have had a religious significance. On Northey Island, many round barrows are found, thought to have been constructed on top of the dwellings of chiefs. Along with the settlement on the island, there were also stilt houses like those at Must Farm, which were built over the water. Today there is a visitor center on the location, where you can see what remains. The now exposed stilts which were preserved from that original causeway have to be kept wet to keep them from decaying. We also might have a bridge that survives from this period. The tar steps in Somerset. They are made from stone slabs, and this primitive type of bridge is called a clapper bridge. It is debated whether this bridge dates back from the Bronze Age or if it was built in the Middle Ages. But either way, we know that the Bronze Age people had the technology to make this type of bridge. Around 1200 BC, the Urnfield culture reached Britain. This culture was widespread throughout Europe, and the name comes from the custom of cremating their dead and placing their ashes in urns, which were then buried in fields. They are thought to have spoken an early Celtic language, from which the Celtic languages would later evolve. During this time we also see the formation of early hill forts, which would become a more common form of fortification during the Iron Age. The earliest known building that was built specifically for metalworking was found at Sigwells in Somerset and dates to around 1200 BC. Between 1140 BC and 1020 BC, there was a period of intensified metalworking. This period has been called the Wilburton-Wallington phase, after the Wilburton complex in the south and the Wallington complex in the north. Both metalworking complexes are characterized by the introduction of small amounts of lead in the process of making bronze, which helped to make casting the metal easier. The Late Bronze Age started around 1000 BC and it saw the Urnfield culture being replaced by the Hallstatt culture, and the development of the different Celtic languages is thought to have taken place during this time as well. It's also thought that the famous Uffington White Horse was created sometime during the Late Bronze Age. As time went on, trade networks only continued to strengthen. The line that distinguishes the Bronze and the Iron Age is blurry as well, but I will set the line at 800 BC. Thanks for watching this video. As always, you can leave your comments down below, and on screen right now you can click on the playlist of this series if you're interested in more of these types of videos. Or if you're interested in history in general, you can check out my channel to find a wider range of historical topics.